The sound of the slap echoed through the grand hall like a thunderclap, shocking the guests into stunned silence. I stood frozen, the sharp sting of my father's hand burning across my cheek. It wasn't the first time he'd struck me. It wasn't even the worst. But this time felt different. My jaw clenched, but I didn't flinch. I knew better than to show weakness in front of him. The murmur of the crowd rippled around me like an unwelcome tide, but I didn't care. My eyes locked on his, steely and unwavering as he stood there. His lips curled in contempt. I saw the familiar look in his eyes, disappointment mixed with something darker. And beneath that something new, fear. The gasps from the crowd seemed to bounce off the marble walls. I could feel their stares, their judgment, their pity. But their eyes meant nothing to me. My father's voice rang out, bitter and cold. His words slicing through the tension. "You're not welcome here." The words landed like a blow, but it wasn't the first time he had said them. The man who had disowned me 15 years ago now stood before me. The same arrogant man who thought he could control everything and everyone around him. And yet it was him standing there, trembling. He couldn't stop it. He couldn't stop me. The words hit me harder than the slap ever could, and I could feel the years of hurt and rage rising within me. But I wasn't going to give him the satisfaction of seeing me break. Before I could respond, the unmistakable sound of chairs scraping against the floor thundered through the room. My eyes flickered to the left, and then I saw them. 400 Navy SEALs. Silent, powerful, their boots heavy against the floor. 2 generals stood among them, their faces as hard as stone, eyes locked on me with nothing but respect. The world stopped for a moment, and then, together as one, those warriors rose to their feet, their salute a single, unbreakable unit. The air was thick with the weight of their loyalty. "Major Cole, ma'am." They all spoke, their voices rumbling in perfect unison. For a moment, time seemed to slow. My father's face drained of all color. The same hand that had struck me now trembled violently, as if reality had finally hit him. The girl he had disowned, the one he had dismissed, was now someone he could never deny. The SEALs, every single one of them, stood for me. The silence in the hall was suffocating. Even the brass band had stopped playing. The only sound that filled the space was the soft, almost imperceptible crack of my father's hand, still hovering in the air, trembling with the realization of his mistake. But his shame was nothing compared to the quiet strength I felt coursing through me. He had thought he could break me. He had thought he could erase me. But all he had done was give me the power to rise above him. I stood there, still, unwavering, my chin held high. I wasn't the girl he had cast aside. I wasn't the girl he had slapped or disowned. I wasn't the failure he had believed me to be. I was Major Cole now. And my name, my rank, and the respect I had earned through years of blood, sweat, and sacrifice meant more than anything he could ever say or do. My father's hand dropped to his side. He opened his mouth to speak, but the words didn't come. He was silenced. Not by my anger, not by my defiance, but by the undeniable truth that stood before him. I wasn't here to beg for his approval. I wasn't here for him to recognize me. I was here for something far more important, respect. And I had earned it. With a final glance at the man who once made me feel like nothing, I turned on my heel. The SEALs followed suit, their movements in perfect unison, their discipline unwavering. We walked as one, a united front, leaving my father behind. He could never control me again. He could never break me again. The room was still. The echoes of that moment would resonate for years to come. But for me, that night marked the end of my journey for validation. I no longer needed his approval. I had earned my place. 15 years. That's how long it had been since I'd last seen him. 15 years since my father, the man I once thought I would never stop loving, had thrown me out like an unwanted piece of trash. And yet, in all that time, not a single call, not a single word. My existence meant nothing to him. I can still remember that night, the heat of summer pressing down on me like the weight of the world. My brother had just received his acceptance letter to West Point, and my father had been so proud, so sure that he would follow in his footsteps, wear those medals, and carry on the family legacy. But I wasn't him. I wasn't my brother. I wasn't the girl my father had wanted me to be. When I told him I wanted to carve my own path, that I had dreams of my own, his face turned red. He didn't listen. He couldn't understand. To him there was only one way, the way he had chosen for all of us. Anything else, anything that didn't fit the image of the man he had constructed in his own mind, was a betrayal. "You're not good enough. You'll never be good enough," he had said. His voice laced with anger. "You think you're special. You're nothing without this family, without me." It wasn't just his words that cut me deep. It was the way he looked at me, the disdain in his eyes, the realization that I would never be what he wanted me to be. The slap came next. Violent. My cheek burned, but it wasn't the pain that hurt the most. It was the coldness in his eyes, the finality in his voice when he said, "Get out. You're no daughter of mine." I remember standing there, numb, as he stormed into my room, yanked open my dresser drawers, and started throwing my things into a duffel bag. His voice was steady, cold. "You will not shame me. You will not drag my name into the dirt. You leave tonight and you don't come back." And so I left, with nothing but a single bag and a heart full of broken dreams. I didn't know where I was going. I didn't know how I would survive. But I knew one thing. I wasn't going to let him win. I wasn't going to let his rejection define me. I walked down that street, the glow of our house fading behind me, and I thought about the years to come. The years I would spend proving him wrong. Not for him, not to earn his approval, but for me. For the girl he tried to bury. I enlisted soon after. Basic training was brutal. I wasn't the strongest, the fastest, or the most gifted. But what I had was relentless determination. Every insult hurled my way, every doubt cast on me, only fueled the fire inside. When others broke, I pushed harder. When they quit, I stayed. And through it all, I carried his voice in my head. "You're nothing. You don't belong. You'll never be good enough." But I turned those words into fuel. Every step, every mile, every drop of sweat, I reminded myself that pain was temporary, but failure was forever. Months turned into years. The training didn't get easier, but I did. I learned to survive, to fight, to lead. And when the time came for me to lead others, I didn't do it with fear. I did it with example. I earned their trust not through rank, but through my actions. The SEALs, they didn't care about my background. They didn't care about my family or my name. What they cared about was whether I could lead them in battle, whether I could take them through hell and back. And when I proved that I could, they respected me. Not because I asked for it. Not because of anything I was born into. But because I earned it. I became a leader not by being perfect, but by refusing to quit when everyone else did. And when I was 25, I had seen things that would haunt most people for the rest of their lives. I had carried brothers and sisters off the battlefield, their blood staining my hands, their sacrifice etched into my soul. But I never let it break me. I let it make me stronger. At 30, I was a Navy SEAL. I had done what no one thought I could do. I had survived when so many others had failed. And now I was something more. I was someone my father could never have imagined. But not once did I reach out to him. Not once did I seek his approval. Because I didn't need him anymore. I didn't need his validation. I had built my life inside the silence he had left behind. And inside that silence, I learned who I truly was. It wasn't until I was in the thick of combat, deep in the sand and dust of foreign lands, that I truly understood what my father had tried to teach me all those years. It wasn't his harsh words or his cruel rejection that would make me strong. It was the lessons I had learned from surviving in the silence, from fighting not just the enemy in front of me but the demons that lived inside me. I still remembered the first time I faced death. The first time I watched someone fall in front of me, their life extinguished in the blink of an eye. The weight of their sacrifice crushed me, but it didn't break me. In those moments when everything around me was chaos, when the only sound was the roar of gunfire and the pounding of my heart, I found something in myself I had never known existed. A calm, a clarity, a drive to survive that came from deep within. I wasn't the fastest or the strongest, but I was relentless. And in this world of steel and fire, that was enough. I built trust with my teammates, my brothers and sisters in arms, because they saw that I would never leave them behind. I carried them when they couldn't carry themselves. I led them when they were afraid. And they followed me, not because I was their superior, but because I had earned their respect. It wasn't given to me. It wasn't inherited. It was forged through fire. As the years passed, I climbed higher and higher through the ranks. My name became known, first among a few, then among many. And still my father's silence remained. There was never a word of encouragement, never a phone call to ask how I was. But I didn't need that anymore. I had learned how to be my own anchor, how to find my strength in the battle, and not in the approval of a man who had never believed in me. It was when I made admiral that I realized the magnitude of what I had accomplished. Not the title, not the medals or the recognition, but the journey. The countless nights spent alone, the endless training, the moments when everything felt impossible. And through it all, I had never once let his words defeat me. I had never let his rejection define who I was. I had built my identity on my terms, not his. But even after all this time, I still couldn't forget that night. The night he had kicked me out of his house, the night I had sworn that I would make him see who I truly was. That night had shaped me, had driven me to become the woman standing before him now. But I knew deep down that I didn't need his recognition anymore. I didn't need his approval. I had become everything he said I could never be. And that, in itself, was the greatest victory of all. Still, the years had not been kind. The old wounds didn't just fade away with time. There were nights I lay awake, haunted by memories of that last look he gave me, that final, cutting dismissal. I had spent so many years trying to prove him wrong, trying to show the world that I was worthy. And now, here I was, a decorated admiral, leading the finest soldiers in the world. But a part of me still wondered, still longed for that moment when he would look at me and see what I had become. And that moment would come sooner than I expected. The invitation came without warning. A simple piece of paper, an official invite to the Veterans Honor Banquet. The irony wasn't lost on me. My father, Colonel Richard Cole, had been invited as one of the honored guests. For years, he had lived in the spotlight of his military career, basking in the glory of his service. And yet here I was, having earned my own place, my own recognition, while he remained a shadow of the man he used to be. I stared at the invitation for what felt like an eternity. My fingers traced the embossed letters, and in that moment I knew. This wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about humiliation or showing him up. It was about something far more significant. Closure. I could have ignored the invitation. I could have thrown it away and continued on with my life, far away from the man who had rejected me. But I wasn't that girl anymore. I had a duty, a responsibility to show up. To stand there, not as the daughter he had cast aside, but as the leader I had become. The woman he had never believed I could be. The morning of the banquet, the air was sharp, crisp with the promise of autumn. As I stood in front of the mirror in my quarters, I couldn't help but take in the reflection before me. The uniform gleamed white, every medal, every ribbon reflecting the hard-fought battles, the sacrifices that had led me to this moment. The 4 stars on my shoulders weren't just symbols of my rank. They were scars, hard-earned and won through blood, sweat, and relentless determination. I adjusted my collar, straightened my posture, and for a moment I hesitated. Not out of fear but out of something else. Question, a doubt. Would he even recognize me? Would he see anything other than the daughter he had thrown away so many years ago? I had to remind myself why I was there. I wasn't going for him. I wasn't going for reconciliation. I wasn't going for revenge. I was going because the silence had lasted long enough. Because it was time for the truth to come to light. Time for me to stand tall and show the world who I was. Not because of him but in spite of him. The venue was grand. A lavish hall draped with flags and banners, filled with decorated veterans and distinguished guests. A brass band played softly in the background, a melancholy melody that seemed to echo the weight of the occasion. The scent of polished wood and the faint smell of old honor lingered in the air. I walked into the room, my boots clicking sharply against the marble floor. I felt the eyes of the crowd on me, the whispers rising like a tide. The moment I stepped into the room, everything seemed to slow. Conversations faltered. People stood a little straighter. Some whispered my name, others just stared, unsure of what to make of me. And then there he was, my father, Colonel Richard Cole. He sat in the front row, a figure of authority as always. His chest was heavy with medals, his face carved from stone, the pride he had once held for his military career now a facade of arrogance and superiority. But there was no warmth in his eyes when he saw me. No recognition. No acknowledgement of the years I had spent fighting to become the person I was. I couldn't help but study him for a moment. Age had taken its toll on him. His once strong frame was now thinner, his hair graying, his back not quite as straight as it once had been. But the fire was still there. The same fire that had driven him to push me away all those years ago. I approached the empty seat near him, my eyes not leaving him for a second. The moment I got closer, his gaze flickered, but he didn't speak. He didn't need to. His presence alone was enough to send a clear message. You're still not welcome here. And that's when it happened. His voice, sharp and bitter, echoed across the hall. You're not welcome here. The words cut through the air like a whip, but I didn't flinch. I didn't blink. I didn't move. I stood there, calm, steady, in the face of the very man who had once tried to destroy me. And then, just like all those years ago, his hand shot out, slapping me across the face. The sting was immediate, but it didn't faze me. The crowd gasped, some of them shocked, some looking away in discomfort. But I stood still, rooted in place, not giving him the satisfaction of seeing me break. And then, just as he expected me to crumble, something else happened. The unmistakable sound of 400 chairs scraping across the floor rang out. I turned my head slightly, my heart racing, and I saw them. The Navy SEALs. Every single one of them, rising in perfect unison. Their boots slammed against the floor in a synchronized rhythm that echoed like a wave of steel. Their eyes locked on me. They stood not because they had to, but because they wanted to. Major Cole, ma'am. They all spoke in perfect harmony, their voices powerful, resonating with authority. The moment was electric. The air crackled with a kind of energy that sent shivers down my spine. And as my father's face drained of color, as he trembled in disbelief, I knew. This was the moment. This was the reckoning he had never anticipated. The room went silent. The breathless gasp of the guests hung in the air like an unspoken question. My father's face turned a pale shade of white, his hand still hovering in the air, as though frozen in time. He had struck me, his own daughter, only moments before, trying to bring me back to that place of insignificance where he thought I belonged. But now, the very thing he had tried to destroy, the very force he had dismissed, stood before him, and he had nowhere to hide. The SEALs, 400 strong, remained standing, their eyes unflinching, their posture unyielding. Every one of them, from the seasoned veterans to the young recruits, stood with absolute resolve, their loyalty not just to the military but to me. They didn't need to speak. Their presence, their unity, was the message. They were with me. My father, the man who had once filled this room with nothing but pride and arrogance, now looked small. His chest, once so broad, sagged under the weight of his shame. His jaw, which had been so firm when he cast me out, now trembled. And in that moment, I realized something I hadn't fully understood before. The power he had held over me for so long, the fear, the rejection, the pain, was now gone. He was no longer the giant I had once seen him as. He was just a man, his pride shattered, his arrogance exposed. Admiral Cole, a voice from the back of the room boomed, and I turned to see the two generals stepping forward, their uniforms gleaming with the weight of their own service. They were legends in their own right, their names etched in history for their bravery and leadership. But today they stood before me, acknowledging my own achievements. And for the first time I saw something in their eyes: respect. Not the kind of respect given out of obligation or rank, but a deeper, more genuine recognition of who I had become. "Your orders, ma'am," one of them said. His voice steady and commanding, but soft with the reverence that came from shared experience. And just like that, the room shifted. The walls that had once been a fortress for my father's pride now seemed to close in on him. The SEALs, the generals, the veterans, they all looked at me, not with pity or doubt, but with recognition. The recognition of someone who had earned her place, not because of who her father was, but because of who she had become. My father's hand, still trembling in the air, slowly fell to his side. His lips parted, but no words came. He wanted to speak. He wanted to deny the truth that stood before him, but the truth was undeniable. The daughter he had thrown away had become the woman he could no longer ignore. I didn't need to say anything. My silence, my presence, spoke louder than any words ever could. The SEALs didn't need to shout, didn't need to demand respect. Their actions, their unity said it all. And as the room remained in stunned silence, I understood that the victory was mine, not because of the spectacle, but because of the quiet strength that had carried me here. In my father's eyes, I saw the cracks begin to form, the mask of invulnerability he had worn for so long starting to crumble. He tried to stand taller, but it was futile. The authority he had once commanded with such ease had evaporated in front of everyone. He was no longer the powerful figure he had once been. He was a man defeated, not by force, but by the truth. And still I didn't speak. I didn't need to. The truth didn't need words. The silence that filled the room was the loudest answer I could give him. But there was something else I had to do. Something I had promised myself years ago, when I had walked out of that house with nothing but a duffel bag and a fire in my heart. It wasn't about making him pay for what he had done to me. It wasn't about humiliating him in front of the world. It was about showing him, once and for all, that I was not the failure he had always seen me as. I was not the girl who would cower in the face of rejection. I had become something more. And today the world would see it. I stepped forward, my boots clicking sharply on the marble floor. The sound seemed to reverberate through the hall, each step a testament to how far I had come. My father's eyes followed me, his face a mixture of disbelief and fear. But I didn't look back. I didn't need to. I had already won. As I reached the podium, the silence was deafening. All eyes were on me, but I didn't flinch. I didn't look away. I stood tall, my posture unyielding, as the weight of the moment settled on my shoulders. This wasn't just my victory. It was the victory of every soldier who had ever been told they weren't enough, every person who had ever been dismissed or rejected. This was proof that silence, my silence, could be louder than any insult, more powerful than any strike. And in that silence I realized something. This wasn't about my father. It wasn't about proving anything to him. It was about me. About the woman I had become, the leader I had forged myself into. He had tried to break me, but he hadn't succeeded. He never would. The applause came softly at first, like a ripple across the ocean, hesitant but growing stronger with each passing second. It wasn't the polite, forced applause of a ceremony. This was real. This was earned. This was respect not just from my peers but from the world. From a world that had seen me and finally understood who I was. The applause continued to swell, and I stood there, unmoving, unbroken, as the sound of it filled the hall. My father sat there, stunned, as the world shifted around him. And as the last echoes of the applause died down, I turned on my heel and walked out of that hall, leaving behind the past, leaving behind the man who had tried to erase me. The silence I left behind was all the victory I needed. I left the hall without another glance back. The sound of my heels against the marble floor echoed in the empty space, a rhythmic, steady beat that marked the final chapter of this journey. As I walked toward the exit, the weight of everything I had achieved in silence seemed to settle around me like a heavy cloak. The world had seen it. They had witnessed the daughter who had been cast out, the one who had been told she wasn't enough, now standing as an admiral, leading with the same quiet strength she had always carried within her. This moment, this was my victory. Not in the applause, not in the acknowledgement of others, but in the fact that I had done it. I had become everything my father had once dismissed, everything he had once told me I could never be. The applause still echoed in my ears as I stepped through the door, the cheers of recognition slowly fading into the background. But the pride I felt wasn't for the title or the medals I wore. It was for the journey, for the years of struggle, of pushing through when the world tried to break me. It was for the quiet strength I had carried inside me all those years, the strength that had kept me going when everyone else doubted me. The truth was, I didn't need my father's recognition. I didn't need his approval. The woman I had become was not defined by his rejection, nor by his expectations. She was defined by her own courage, her own resolve. I had fought for this life, fought for the right to stand in that room and be respected, not because of who I was born to be, but because of who I had chosen to become. As I walked through the corridors of the building, my team falling in step behind me, I felt something I had never felt before: peace. A quiet, contented peace that came from knowing I had nothing left to prove. The SEALs who had stood by me, who had saluted me with unwavering respect, walked with me now, not as subordinates, but as comrades, as equals. They had seen me rise from the ashes of my past, and they respected me, not because of my rank, but because I had earned it. I reached the elevator, the doors sliding open in front of me, and I paused for just a moment. The weight of the journey hit me all at once. I remembered the girl who had left her home with nothing but a duffel bag and a heart full of rage. I remembered the nights I had spent crying myself to sleep, the loneliness that had haunted me for so long. And yet here I was, a woman who had faced it all and come out stronger. A woman who had earned the right to stand in front of the world and say, "I am enough." The doors closed behind me as I stepped into the elevator, and as it descended, I thought about what lay ahead. There would always be challenges, more battles to fight. But I knew now that I was ready for whatever came my way. Because I had faced the hardest battle of all, the battle to believe in myself. And I had won. The silence that filled the elevator was comfortable now. It wasn't the silence of rejection, the silence of abandonment. It was the silence of someone who had found her place in the world. The silence of peace. And as I stepped out of the building into the cool night air, I felt the weight of the world lift off my shoulders. I didn't need to prove anything to anyone anymore. I had already proven it to myself. And that was enough. The world would know my name. And it would know it not because of who my father was, but because of who I had become. Because I was Admiral Cole. And nothing would ever change that.